You saw that the numbers there were 105 million for the additional debt. Wrong. That was just for the wastewater projections. The total projected, the best information that I've got in the 10-year plan is for another 45 million of water supply. This is over the next 10 years, possibly 20 years. We'll talk about that.
Actually, to add to that, one of the questions is, are your figures projected on this council achieving its projects on budget, which it never does?
All right, there's three things there. Let me take each of those separately. So the debt that's being projected within the 10-year plan is a total of 150 million on infrastructure. And that takes you to a level of debt which I suspect is more than this community can afford. And that when I suggested that an approach to central government may be the only way to go, that's on the basis at the moment, my advice is that there are 7 consents that have expired and haven't been picked up, resource consents, and I see people nodding. One of them goes back to 2002 in Shannon, and that's a deplorable state of affairs. So I have said to people already in the day that I've been here, that to me it becomes not just a community affordability issue, it becomes a tangata whenua, it becomes a local community issue that has got public health at risk. Not just the economic aspects of having a decent water supply and wastewater, but it's public health. If you're having to boil your water, well, sorry, that's a DHB issue. It's a Ministry of Health issue. It's a central government issue, and I would be in the ear of your local MP mercilessly, starting to drop that in if you haven't done already. Because if it's going to get done at the level that is proposed, then that's where the assistance is going to be required. Now, I'm not rating your chances extremely highly, but obviously if you're at the bottom of the league table, that's probably a point where you say, well look, this community needs some assistance. Now the second thing is, I know Brian's hobby horse and he's quite right. How good is the estimate of what those projects will cost? We had a sewerage scheme on the Whangaparoa Peninsula just 3 or 4 years ago that was started out at 32 million or something and ended up over 100 million. Now, on the other hand, Gisborne has just completed their sewer outfall with the local Maori being quite happy with the way it was treated, and they started off at 100 million, well they brought it in at 35 million. With no by your leave or exceptions for water purity and quality. That is, don't let the engineers gold plate your infrastructure, and make sure you get at least 2 or 3 quotes, and make sure your cost control is what it should be, because there is no reason why a public project should be an overrun of that kind. Watch this space. Yeah, I mean, vigilance. The third thing is, and I've been asked to comment on this, apparently this 10-year plan projection, which they call the Manhattans, that is the skylines of the peaks of expenditure and debt that accompany the 10-year plan, was so scary that somebody in the council, I suspect it was the man himself, said, oh well, we will stretch that to 20 years. Well, that is an absolute nonsense, and I'm quite happy to be quoted on that, because the problem's not going to get better by addressing it in 20 years' time. It could well be twice as bad. So that's just cosmetic accounting. It further does. Now, in fact, some sort of stretching might be inevitable because of the limits of funding. But just to say, oh no, we're going to move the goalposts because it looks better and go from a 10-year period spreading the income and the debt to 20 years is to ignore the actual facts. The consents are in a deplorable state now. It should be done tomorrow, not in 20 years' time. How much worse will it be in 20 years' time? But I'm sort of preaching to the choir a bit, I can see.
What's the cost of service on that?
At the moment, you're very fortunate the interest rates are around about the 4%. But which way are they going to go next year and the year after? I don't have that actual factual information.
Just one question. How can I join the 43% who don't pay rates? 157 pay. What's the other 43 doing?
Yeah, well,
And I want to answer one of the ladies.
well, some of them are children that don't own rateable properties. and some of them just don't own property. So that's a question of how many ratepayers there are in the population. Generally, that's around about that 57% mark. But it's a fair question. I mean, you know what happened with the poll tax and Maggie Thatcher, that got thrown out. But that was an attempt to not just charge ratepayers, people that own properties, for services of councils, but people, residents. You know, that it wasn't going to be a property base. Well, they didn't like that any more than probably we wouldn't like it. So I've got to get through this list of questions with...
Okay, it's actually appropriate to make a very sort of short announcement, and that is, some of you may not be aware that David Ward left at fairly short notice, and he left his flooding subdivision and his life as an amphibian to go to the greener pastures of an earthquake zone. That is how bad he viewed this. Now, the congratulations or commiserations, whichever way you want to look at it, go to Mr. David Clapperton, who is our previous corporate services manager, who is now your new CEO. So he's been given the reins of this ship to go with. So you need to know that. I'm sorry. Okay. The other thing I was asked to get comment on is, yesterday Larry and I had a quick drive around the township of Levin, and I showed him where most of the money had been spent by HDC in the past 9 years, and I would like your comment on the priorities of that spending against what we know we have to spend, please.
Okay, I'll just preface that by saying a very brief thank you to Anne, who's provided so much of this information that the council wasn't available to provide, and it's been invaluable to get to We totted up the Feel Good project. Now this is, perhaps I will stretch my neck a bit, stick my neck out a bit. There has been roughly $40 million paid in this district in the last 10 or less years for community projects. Nice to have stuff. Only problem is that some of that has either taken funding that would be available for essential infrastructure, cost-effective, community-based infrastructure for future generations, okay? And I make no comment about the advisability of spending the money that they have spent. But those are assets, supposedly, that have the flavour of liabilities, because many of them come with a negative cash flow in terms of revenue. It's not as if you're building a public utility asset that you can have a targeted rate income to service the debt or whatever it is. So, you know, for a swimming pool, you're lucky to get 50 cents in the dollar in terms of the return of the entry fee. In Auckland, for example, our mayor currently is allowing people to get into the swimming pools for nothing. Now, you extend that to, is it Takari? Takari? Now, I walked through there yesterday and I was absolutely amazed at an expensive facility that I couldn't imagine the minuscule income coming off that. And now it's a community asset, and people might say, well, look, we've got to provide something for the kids. Fair enough. But in the meantime, what's happening at the lake, what's happening down Queen Street Drain, you know, these are the things that have been left to lie. Now, as for what, and I will use some strong terms here, Tim Shadbolt actually had to front the magistrate years ago for the use of the word bullshit. And I fervently hope that I'm not ending up in court by the use of that word, because it describes what I would call bullshit castle on State Highway 1. That is an obscenity. That is a blot on the landscape, when incidentally, when a minister of the Crown comes by in his limousine and sees that on State Highway 1, and the next day he receives a deputation from the council for some assistance with a wastewater scheme, what's likely to be their reaction? And I mean, to me, you can do business for local government with some distributed service centres, a regulatory department, and you can do it out of a Quonset hut if you needed to, or a prefab. That particular statement on State Highway 1 says everything that has been wrong with Horowhenua over the last 10 years. It is so much in your face. So I urge you sometime when you've got nothing better to do, to take a walk or a drive, park opposite that building, look at it for 5 minutes and just ponder the significance of it. Because if I can get that message across, then this district will set its face in a new direction. And we'll say, less of the bullshit castle, let's clean up some of the bullshit, would be a better way to go.
It's built in concrete, so I'll be the one floating away.
Now, as far as this council's concerned, the next big project that they want to embark upon is a Dutch museum for Foxton. What will happen if Horowhenua District Council continue on its current plan without urgently changing its direction?
Well, I'll tell you a little war story. We in Puhoi, and this is a microcosm of the world, but just a little community of 1,400 people. There were 3 of us sitting out in front of the pub on a Friday afternoon, and one of the locals said, wouldn't it be nice to have a wharf, to recreate the old wharf that was down on the riverside? And 2 or 3 of us said, yeah, what a bloody good idea. So we got cracking, and we didn't use $1 of ratepayers' money. We got the council to come to the party on the consents and so on, and 2 or 3 years later we've got, because we couldn't get agreement from the community on which side of the river the wharf should go, we've ended up with 2 wharfs, one on each side. A good compromise solution. But my point is that if there's going to be a community project, and let's not pick winners or losers, if there's going to be a community project, then I really believe that volunteerism, funding from other sources, we get a lot of our money from the pokies, and no doubt some of you like myself play the pokies occasionally. That's the first place to look. What you must not do is just expect the council, and ultimately the council is just the ratepayer, to fund these community projects, particularly at a time when the priorities are saying other things. We've got a case in point with the group that I work with in Whangarei, who are very hot about the Huntertwasser Art Gallery. Now, bless them. I mean, it's a wonderful project, but over the ratepayer's dead body, I would say, because Whangarei is in that bottom 11. And you people are in the same, I mean, we have got to cut our cloth. After all, we've had a recession, we're not out of it yet, and you've seen the stats. Do they say that you can afford any more of these community projects? I think not, folks. It might be that you'll need to get better value out of what you've got, and I'll just leave it at that. I did drive around the district yesterday, and it was very revealing, because I can see so much potential with simple areas that can be cleaned up. Obviously the lake is the principal one, but there's also stuff that can be done at that grassroots community level, and that's the way things have got to go. I mean, don't spend any more dollars than you can help on anything other than cleaning up the mess that's there at the moment in the public utilities area.
Any other questions?
Yes.
I'm just interested in, and thank you very much for this, because it's a great day. It's a great day. People starting to realise what happened. I was a city councillor in Palmersmith, an elected city councillor at the same time as Peter Wheeler got it at the Palmersmith City Council. And I very soon discovered that you actually can't, as a city councillor, talk to anybody but the CEO, because they're your only employee as an elected member. What are your thoughts on opening that up more, that senior management can be equally questioned in the same light as a CEO on any matter? Because I believe the conduit's too narrow between councillors and management. And I believe that councillors are given a lot of information on which to base their vote that is not good quality information, and believe it would be much more a chance of having good information if we could actually talk to the people that are in charge of sewage, the people that are in charge of wastewater, community development, those sorts of things. Any thoughts on that in terms of widening that in the local government act?
Yeah, thank you for that. There's probably 2 or 3 questions in there that I'll quickly address. That is the suggestion I made about a lethal audit committee and the accountability that comes with an effective committee structure is that they don't accept crap information. First of all, if there's a proposal, it's got to have in the Local Government Act requires us, there should be at least 3 options. One is generally a status quo, one is generally a high cost, and the third one is a low cost, like a gold-plated or a less gold-plated. That's just very much a summary. There could be 5 options. But often what we see is wheeled up as a fait accompli for a rubber stamp from the elected members, just the one favourite proposal that's been crafted together in the back offices of the officers concerned. That's what you're saying. But there is some good news, not only, in my humble opinion, with the change of the purposes clause, but also for the first time in at least a decade, the CEO is now no longer the totally top-level, unchallengeable kingpin. And the reason for that is because they have introduced legislation in 2012, same legislation that changed the purposes, to say that now elected members, and I think this starts July 1, that's coming up. No, when was it? Last week. The balloon's gone up, folks. Elected members now are empowered by the legislation to take a direct hand in payroll and staff numbers. A big hooray for that. Now, that means that that particular governance and audit committee needs to be very well informed in that area, because there's a lot of fish hooks, and don't you worry. I've been in there and done some. For example, what is a full-time equivalent? Not defined. So how many consultants are really effectively full-time employees but are not on the head count? So there's all this other BS floating around. But at least it's a sign that the CEO's unchallengeable situation is altering. And I can see that may be a case where, without having elected members back to the point where they were meddling in the potholes, remember that? But we can somehow get a compromise and a best endeavours basis of people working sensibly to remove some of this autocratic power that's been given to the CEO, and perhaps in other areas too, so that we get a better balance, because there have been situations where CEOs acting in an autocratic manner have basically abused the consultative process. We saw that in Kaipara, and Kaipara's ratepayers are going to court next month in Whangarei as a result with the judicial review. And a lot of that came from the secret meetings of the A-team, of the consultants in the engineering area, the CEO and the mayor, and nobody else knew Dicky Bird about it. I didn't know about it, and I was a financial advisor of the council that took a whistleblower from the inside to wave the flag on my part. Once again, where the hell were the auditors?
You've got, in the list of councils, you don't actually show the amount of debt. Now, for example, I'm from Cavity, ours is 196 million and growing.
Yep.
Is it because they won't supply you the figures, or is it because they want to hide those figures on it? We've got a guy down home that actively keeps finding out what the current figure is, and he puts it on a big billboard in Cavity Road.
He doesn't do it with mirrors, but if you get my email and send me an email, I'll send you a comparative figure of the last 5 years of debt, averages the whole 9 yards of TLA, that's territorial local authorities, including Kapiti, as to what the debt is, debt per rate of the whole 9 yards. And see if you can get me in front of an audience down in Kapiti.
That was what I was going to ask. We've got the same bullshit there. We've just had a $10 million refurbishment, swimming pool, a multi-million-dollar art gallery, and all of those.
Fortunately, your ratepayers are a bit better heeled, well heeled. That's the only reason that. But where are they sitting? Where are they sitting on the league table, by the way? They're about 48 or something, are they? 56. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Phil.
First of all, thanks very much.
Sure.
Bill, use the microphone.
I've had a long-running argument with the auditors, and we always keep, particularly for Mr. Ward, when there's any questions on the mayor, that these accounts have been audited and you've got an unqualified audit report. I would like to know what assurances can we as ratepayers have that the auditors are actually doing their job and keeping this council and others honest.
Oh, that last bit's a bit of fish hook. The auditors are there to do a job, and they have professional standards that they have to adhere to, and in 95 out of 100 cases, they, I think, do a pretty fair job. In the 5% though, and Kuiper of course is an absolute clear case where they did not do their job. A simple audit default is likely to find them or the government coughing up some money for some professional indemnity insurance monies for their negligence. And that's the first point. The second thing is, they have, as a group, and I used to be with the equivalent of Audit New Zealand and the OAG, the Office of the Auditor General, a few years back, and we had a fire-breathing Auditor General called Brian Tyler, and he should be remembered for his fearless bulldog approach. In fact, it was so exhausting for those of us that worked for Brian that we called him Brain Toiler, because he was that insistent on getting to the bottom of stuff. And I earned my spurs in the public sector audit business under Brian. Now, I'm afraid to say that with possible exception of Kevin Brady and one Auditor General who was locked up, wasn't he? Chapman, remember that? He went to prison for a couple of years, so a bit of an oopsie there. The current demeanour of our auditors is shocking. They need a bomb under them. I suspect that they're spending a lot of time in Lambton Quay just drinking lattes and chattering with the other coffee drinkers. Now, I mean, I'm being obviously a bit provocative, but it really, once again, ticks me off that the standards that we adhere to have fallen so far that you can allow, Christchurch is another one. Where were the auditors? I've used that phrase a couple of times already. But I draw the line at some point on the external auditors. Internal auditors are slightly different, because the external auditors have got enough to do to make sure that the show is on the road. Without getting too much into it, I'd like for them to get into performance management and improvement. But that's where the audit committee and perhaps an internal audit function, even a performance auditor. Remember I said there should be annual reports? Well, there should be something behind that of people monitoring. One of the things that they should be doing annually, every council should be doing, an independent, moderated public opinion survey. Now, when did you have your last one in Horowhenua? Well, start insisting on it, folks. And no BS things about how lovely the council is. Some real gutsy things. Are you getting value for your rates? Are you happy with the present condition of the consenting for the wastewater scheme? Well, I mean, maybe now's the time, if you've got a league table that's sort of waving a few flags, maybe the time is right for a ratepayers association to start doing some surveys of their own. Shame them into it. Okay, well, I work with a think tank in Manitoba in Canada, and they are totally opposed to amalgamations. For good reasons. However, I say to them, horses for courses, folks. Now, I'll put a big if on this. If it can be demonstrated that, particularly with utilities management, the roading network, the water and wastewater, that there can be economies over a region of amalgamation, then I'm all for it. Problem is, when these power-hungry bureaucrats, without the appropriate governance over the top of them, get in front of, or get their hands on the levers of a bigger organisation, the community up misses out, doesn't it? We've got the situation in Auckland where, in fact, I'm spending some time at the moment on a breakaway of North Rodney, even after, 2 years with Auckland Council. We didn't want to go into the Auckland Council for reasons that weren't listened to. We didn't have any poll or anything, we just got lumbered in there, so we're trying to get out. Now, so I don't give a general doctrinal answer to that question. It's horses for courses. I've just done the numbers for the Wairarapa, for the three councils, Masterton, Carterton and South Wairarapa over there, to show what it would look like. Now, obviously, there's a financial dimension to it. Dare I suggest that you might struggle to find a partner? For the reasons that Kaipara is struggling to find a partner.
Larry,
So it might be upside for you if you can find a partner.
Larry, it's obvious to me that this is a tool for council members to gauge
The league table?
council.
Absolutely.
Could it be adjusted into a tool for councils to use prior to that? You know, does it have to be an after the fact thing? Could it not be used as a tool to guide them?
Absolutely, or something like it. If they subscribe to the notion, radical thought that it is, of performance improvement. Because most don't. And that's the reason why I've struggled to make a few bucks in this job for so long. I gave up at one point. I shot myself in the foot basically. I said, right, bugger this. I'm going to produce a league table because this information has to be out there with the communities. Because the councils weren't listening. But I would go back to 98 when I first started with my base stats with trends, which was the way, instead of the league table, it was directly focused on the performance of each council. And that was very useful because I was talking to a fellow called Tony Stellinger, and he's now the CEO of Hutt City. And I told this story last night at dinner. In 2007, I think it was, Hutt City, having said we're going to set our face to performance improvement over the next 5 to 7 years, they won the premier New Zealand Business Excellence Award in 2006 or 7, I can't remember exactly which, against all comers, private sector and public sector. Now, there would have been people before that would say, well, look, no New Zealand council could ever achieve a level of performance for a variety of probably reasonable reasons. But here was a council that said, right, we're going to do the ISO program of performance improvement. We're going to do the Baldridge Award, and lo and behold, they beat Fisher and Paykel, Fonterra, all comers. They were the best organisation judged by an independent panel of any organisation in the country that year. So the answer is, unfortunately, to my knowledge, I could count on the fingers of one hand out of the 76 councils, on the councils in New Zealand that are conducting a halfway decent performance improvement program. It's just off the radar. That has got something to do with the vacuum that auditors left because they used to take an interest in performance improvement. It's a fact that elected members have not insisted upon having a lethal CEO who's given a performance-based task. I mean, it must really give you the stitch to see CEOs being paid on performance pay, collecting a bonus, and then departing down the country for somewhere else. I mean, it's the same thing in banking, isn't it? There doesn't seem to be any justice at that CEO level in terms of remuneration. So, I mean, we've got to get back into some balance where we're paying for performance at every level, right through the whole staff levels. And that's a long-winded way of saying, well, if the league table starts that ball rolling, terrific. So,
Could I just suggest the problem today is in fact an attitude, and you partly answered
the culture, you mean?
Yeah. You partly answered the question that I was going to ask, which is, why do we pay people at the rate we pay them and increase their salaries based on the average of everyone else's salary? That means that in fact we promote the mediocre simply because there's the odd good guy who can do something. So what I'm suggesting, and I think when I was a young man, that's 50 years ago, we had a sense of fairness about it. Whether you were in council or whether you weren't, you had a sense of fairness. That's gone today. I mean, when you look at what some councillors are paid for what they actually do, one wonders about the justice of it. And what I'm suggesting to you is get your league tables out, get them as seen by as many people as possible, and let's readjust our expectations of what we can expect for what we pay. We
Well-
cannot afford to carry on.
I think you put your finger on the sociological wider issue, which, you know, I can't make more than the comment that, yes, things have changed. That idea of fairness, it's dog eat dog these days. And as soon as the private sector CEOs start to get these stratospheric salaries, then suddenly CEOs in local government started to get paid very highly. And there was a time when public service was a big part of the contribution that an elected member made to the running of the council, so that remuneration wasn't the be-all and end-all. And there are some councillors who are professional elected members for the dollars. Now, that to me is a complete reversal of what that public service ethic used to be. But I'd have to say this, that uneasy lies the head for the CEO. Don't forget that most of them are only on short-term 3 to 5 year contracts. And every 5 years or so they come up for renewal. Now those are pretty insecure terms of employment. So the other side of the coin is that you have to pay them something of a premium. But what really gets my goat is that they're there to perform, and really there's very little that is ensuring in a monitoring and a performance management sense to see that they do perform. So are they getting their money for nothing? No, many of them work very hard. And I mean, Tony Stellinger, now the CEO, absolutely brilliant man. And many of them that give their guts, but there's a few that, as human beings the world over will find some sort of a loophole and exploit it.